Hello and welcome to Ag PhD. I'm Darren Hefty.
And I'm Brian Hefty. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk today a little bit about fertilizing your soybeans. We think this is one of the most important things you can do to raise a better soybean crop. We're going to talk about what nutrients that soybean crop needs and how important it is to make sure you're fertilizing this year rather than counting on last year's fertilizer to do a good job for your crop.
We're also going to talk about weed control programs that will stand the test of time. We're going to focus on using different sites of action. And if you're not familiar with that term, you will be after today's show.
We've got a Weed of the Week and an Iron Talk coming up later in the show, but first, here's this week's Farm Basics.
Farm Basics is brought to you by the Liberty Link trait and Liberty herbicide from Bayer. The most reliable weed management solution, Liberty Link and Liberty herbicide are the link to efficient row crop production and sustainable weed management.
Today during our Farm Basics time, we're going to talk a little bit about a particular life cycle of plant that's just a little bit unusual. It's called winter annual.
As soon as you get away from doing tillage on your farm, you're going to see those weeds that popped up late in the fall, winter annual weeds, that all of a sudden in the spring, they already have some pretty good size to them. They have some pretty decent root systems. These are weeds, winter annuals, that germinate in the fall. Now wait a second, we're talking about an annual weed. How can it germinate in the fall, survive a winter in the northern United States, and still be growing in the spring?
Well, it just does. And I just have some notes here because I couldn't remember all the names of all these different annual weeds. There are a whole bunch of them. Weeds like shepherd's purse, horseweed, Venus mallow can even be, it's not always, but it can be a winter annual. Prickly lettuce, henbit, pepperweed, speedwell. I mean, I could go on. There's an enormous list.
I think about mare's tail. That's one of them that we seem to fight the most across the country, where it starts off in the fall and now in the spring it's pretty big. And you may be thinking, well, I'll just do some light tillage then in the spring. Not when you've got a big, tough weed like that. A lot of times you'll see mare's tail, it just gets kinked over a little bit by tillage and it just keeps on growing. So it gets to be a little bit of a challenge. What happens a lot of times for farmers in reduced tillage situations is they have to rely on herbicides. Maybe it's Roundup, maybe it's Gramoxone, maybe it's Sharpen, a number of herbicides that can do a burn down, basically control all the weeds before you go and plant the crop. So burn down applications become very popular when you have winter annual issues like the weeds that we've talked about.
In the northern part of the United States also, it's very difficult a lot of years to get harvest done, get the fertilizer on, get the tillage done, and all this has to occur before freeze up. And unfortunately, sometimes freeze up comes pretty early. On our farm, it's happened as early as early November. So to think that we're going to get all that fall work done and then we're going to go out and spray some weeds, and we especially see these winter annual weeds, like Darren said, in a no-till or strip-till situation, but it's really difficult to get out and have the time to actually do some spraying in the fall. So that's why on a lot of farms we see those winter annuals just left, and if they happen to survive the winter, now it's a big plant come spring, and it's a real challenge to deal with in no-till and strip-till environments.
So we plant the crop and we've got some tiny little spring or summer annual weeds that are starting to germinate. Then you've got these great big winter annuals. It's really tough for farmers to dial in exactly what rate of herbicide they need. While a low rate may work great for all the weeds that just germinated in the spring, they need a much higher rate for those winter annuals. On the other hand, they may have to spray earlier than they normally would. So they're out in their fields spraying those winter annuals when the spring and summer annuals haven't even come up yet, and they've got to come back and make an extra application in crops. There are a lot of challenges when winter annuals are on a farm.
Well, once again, a winter annual is just a plant that's going to live for 1 year or less. It's going to germinate in the fall. And so by spring, when a farmer would normally plant his spring crops, these weeds could be good sized.
One other weed that gets some pretty good size to it is our Weed of the Week. Can you identify this week's weed?
What's next in weed control technology? Roundup Ready 2 Xtend soybeans will provide tolerance to dicamba and glyphosate and will be built on the Genuity Roundup Ready to Yield trait. See them in action at extendfollowafield.com.
If a new machine storage building or shop has been on your mind, it's time to call Morton Buildings. Now through the end of February, take advantage of discount pricing during our Building Value Days sales event. For over 110 years, Morton has served the American farmer with quality buildings for a variety of uses that meet your needs and style. Give us a call or visit us online and join generations of customers who've discovered the quality and dependability of a Morton building.
Capello corn headers are designed for producers who expect more. Expect more grain in your bin. Expect an industry-leading 2-year manufacturer's warranty. Expect Capello design chopping and folding options that save you time and money. And whether red, green, or yellow, expect row size options that fit your operation because all producers deserve the best. Expect Capello. It's ahead above the rest.
For years, FarmLogic has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
Looking to maximize yield? QuickRoots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. QuickRoots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. QuickRoots is applied to the seed so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your QuickRoots today.
A proven herbicide for decades, dicamba can provide burn-down residual control of tough and resistant weeds for up to 14 days. That's another reason why farmers will use dicamba for years to come. Brought to you by Roundup Ready Plus Weed Management Solutions.
One of the most important things you can do to prevent weed resistance or disease resistance or insect resistance is to rotate chemical families. Now, the problem is sometimes 2 different chemical families might have the same mode of action, and more importantly, they might have the same site of action. What we really want you to do is rotate sites of action. So today we wanted to explain, first of all, what's the difference between sites of action, mode of action, chemical family, but then also talk about why you need to rotate, what some of your options are, especially with Roundup resistant weeds.
Well, it just seems like yesterday we were watching football games. Now football season is over, Brian, and I just think about it the same way with killing a weed and stopping a running back. For example, I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan, and I'm thinking about how do other teams try to stop Adrian Peterson? Well, let's say you have 2 defenders. They're both going to try and tackle him at the same time, and they both like to go for the ankles. Well, Adrian Peterson just jumps over them and runs for a touchdown. Let's say that both guys want to go for his knees. Maybe he does a juke move and gets around them and goes for a touchdown. But if you have one defender that goes for his legs and one defender that tackles him above the waist, now all of a sudden, how is he going to avoid that? He can't. And it's the same thing with weeds. If you have 2 different herbicides that you say, well, I'm going to use this one pre-emerge and that one post-emerge, or I'm going to tank mix them together and go with 2 modes of action out there to control this tough weed. Well, if they're both hitting that weed in the same spot, it's real easy for a weed to develop resistance in just one site of action. But if you have multiple sites of action, so you're hitting the weed high and you're hitting the weed low, now all of a sudden you've got a much better chance of getting control.
That's an interesting analogy there, Darren, but here's what I really wanted to get to.
Well, I just was hoping for more Vikings wins this year, so I'm going to do everything I can to try and drum that up for next year.
All right, we'll see if that can happen. But here's the whole thing. When we're talking about chemical families, it's chemicals that are very similar to each other. Okay, and I think that's fairly easy to understand that you've got, let's say, Treflan and Sonalan that are in the same chemical family. They're both DNAs. They both have a very similar makeup to the products. Okay, then in terms of the mode of action, that's in a particular way that it's going to kill the plant. But here's the whole thing. It's not just the way it kills the plant. We want to know exactly what site is it actually stopping inside the plant. That's what counts the most. And sometimes we can have two modes of action that actually work on the exact same site, and that is going to be a problem if we're trying to prevent disease resistance or weed resistance or insect resistance.
Well, and like you say, just rotating between families is one thing. Also, once you've used one site of action, it's a good idea to focus on using a different site of action later. So when we're talking about weed control, I think soybeans is probably the crop on our farm where it gets to be the most challenging, because we've seen more broadleaves develop resistance to certain chemistries, whether it's the ALS inhibitors or whether it's Roundup. We've just got a number of different chemistries that have been rendered less effective or ineffective. So if we're using one of those families or sites of action as a pre-emerge herbicide, it's a good idea to use something else post. So on our farm, like in soybeans, we'll just look at all the options that we have for post-emerge products, and we try not to use any of those pre, because there are some good options that we can use pre-emerge that can't be used post. So why limit ourselves by taking some of our best post options and using them pre, because we don't want to use them twice within a year, because we don't want to just increase our chance of building more resistance.
To help keep this simple, what the chemical companies have done is they've started putting right on the top of their label what site of action this really is. So the number might be a number 1 or a 2 or a 29 or whatever it is. The point is that you look for that number and make sure that if you want to have rotation of products on your farm, that you're picking different numbers when you're spraying these different products at the different times.
But it's just important that you think about the sites of action that you're using on your farm and trying to use multiple sites of action in every crop, every season. That way you greatly reduce your chance of having problems with resistance from weeds, insects, or diseases on your farm.
Well, our Weed of the Week does have an issue with resistance to multiple chemical families. Can you identify this week's weed?
You can't fill a barrel any fuller than its lowest stave, and your crops can't do any better than the nutrient that's in shortest supply. Your yield potential is only as good as the weakest nutrient in your fertilizer program. Give your crops more than just NPK. Prescription apply all the micronutrients your crop needs, each one customized for your crop's potential. MicroLink, linking yield to potential.
You can put more bushels in your bin without expanding the farm with Yield Track. The new 24-row planter from Titan Machinery features the Case IH Early Riser planting system. Yield Track will take you to the field first with extra flotation come spring. The tracks eliminate pinched rows and reduce compaction. All 22 and 30-inch Yield Tracks come loaded with Case IH technology, including cable drive and AccuRow. Grab more bushels from every acre with Yield Track from Titan Machinery.
For lower cost, higher production, see your Mandaco Agri-Dealer. Ask about the best production-built land roller on the market. Mandaco, simple design for easy transport to easy use. 12 to 85-foot widths, heavy-duty 4x8 3/8-inch tube frame, and now available with a steerable wing wheel. Mandaco land rollers, improved soil-to-seed contact, faster, more uniform germination, less moisture loss, eliminate downtime due to rocks. See your Mandaco Agri-Dealer. Visit northcountrymarketing.biz or call.
Wake up, breakfast is served. Your roots crave pea. Most of your applied pea gets tied up in the soil, a natural phenomenon known as phosphorus fixation. Fix the problem with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Avail makes more pea available to your roots, here, here, and here. Increasing pea availability can lead to increased pea uptake in the plant. That's more pea, and more pea. More phosphorus for your crop can mean more results in your bin. An average of 9.6 bushels per acre of corn. Breakfast is served. Supercharge your pea with Avail.
If you watch Ag PhD TV, you'll love the new Ag PhD radio show each weekday on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80. This is Darren Hefty. On the new Ag PhD radio program, we'll take live callers and provide the agronomic information and brotherly banter you've come to expect from Ag PhD. We'll feature a Back 40 segment where we talk to farmers and agronomists around the country to share what's going on with crop production. And it wouldn't be Ag PhD without addressing a pest of the day. Tune in to the Ag PhD radio show each weekday at 2 p.m. Central on Rural Radio Sirius XM Channel 80.
If you want to raise a great soybean crop, one of the most important things you need to do is fertilize your soybeans every time you plant soybeans, unless of course you have ridiculously high levels of fertility already in the ground.
Our genetics in soybeans are super capable of doing 70, 80, 90, 100 bushel yields if we just feed them right and eliminate some of the other yield limiting factors.
Okay, so when we start talking about soybeans and fertility, one of the things that I like to get to first is potassium. The reason why is because soybeans need a tremendous amount of potassium. If I take a 60 bushel soybean crop compared to a 200 bushel corn crop, for example, my 60 bushel beans need more K, period. So I've got to get a lot of available K, especially a lot of available K late in the season. And this gets to be an issue because if you're going to have a lot of potassium coming available, the potassium gets into the plant with water. If you don't have some late season rain, we are not going to have very good yields. That's why we always say August rains make beans. It's not as much because of the rain sometimes. It's because we get a lot more potassium into the plant. Every day in August, at least in our area, our plants need just a huge amount of potassium. And the trouble with potassium is most of the potassium in our soils is in the form of a rock. It's not going to come available real quickly. So that's why we have to fertilize with potassium, both deep in the soil and shallow in the soil, so we're able to take advantage of any moisture we might have deep. And obviously we have a lot of roots shallow too. So it's placement, it's availability, it's total quantity. Potassium, in my opinion, is the #1 yield limiting factor in most soybean fields I look at around the country. 60 bushel soybean crop needs about 130 pounds of potassium. Now granted, not all that's going to leave the field in the grain. There's roughly half of that that's going to stay in the stover if you leave the stover out there. But still, that's a tremendous amount of potassium. And then we need about, your 60 bushel bean crop is going to need roughly 60 pounds of phosphate. So you start just looking at those two nutrients. I also think about sulfur. Believe it or not, a soybean crop is going to use quite a bit of sulfur out of the ground as well, and sulfur, like nitrate, is leachable. So in other words, if you don't fertilize with sulfur every year, you might not have sulfur available for your soybean crop. Additionally, we talk a lot about micronutrients. That's something that, it probably only will cost you $5, maybe $10 an acre to put all the micronutrients out there you need for a 60, 70, maybe 80 bushel crop. But if you don't do that, then that might be your yield limiting factor. And that's the last thing you want to have happen is $5 or $10 holds you back on your last 10 or 15 bushels of yield.
But how about adding more nitrogen to the program?
Well, let's start by saying this. A soybean seed is a very nutrient-dense seed. It needs a lot of potassium, a lot of phosphorus, a lot of sulfur and micronutrients like we already talked about, but it also needs a lot of nitrogen. Did you know that for every bushel of soybeans, you're roughly going to need 5 to 6 pounds of nitrogen? So if we start talking 60 bushel beans, you're 300 pounds roughly of nitrogen. That's a lot. Well, the soybean crop can produce a lot of its own nitrogen through nodulation, but that's only going to happen if you have good bacteria levels in the soil, you inoculate, you have decent soil pH, you have a good environment for soil life, you have good drainage, all those kind of things. And even that being said, at peak times, peak needs during the season, there's a very good chance that your soybean crop just isn't going to be able to pull enough nitrogen out. So your choice is either have a really high level of organic matter in your soil so you get free release of nitrogen, or you're going to have to supplement with some nitrogen. We do it on our farm by putting some nitrogen out early in the season. We've also done some tests, side dressing at R1, R2, R3, something like that. Basically, I'm talking first flower to first pod, kind of in that range. Get some extra nitrogen out. If nothing else, at least try a little bit on your farm, because all I can tell you is we have seen some yield gain by putting additional nitrogen on soybeans, especially in fields where we haven't planted soybeans very often in the past.
There's a new biological product out called Challenge 2050 that is actually mycorrhizae fungi that can bring phosphorus into plants. We tried that in the furrow with soybeans. We actually had some pretty nice yield gains, and we saw a good deal more phosphorus on our tissue tests coming into the plant when we were adding that biological. It's something we're going to look at more going into next year. We had results on corn and on soybeans this year that were really positive, gave us a good return on investment. So we'll be looking at that again going into this next year and using it on more acres.
The other big thing we get questions on is, can I put fertilizer in furrow? Yes, you absolutely can. Just keep that fertilizer rate really low. On our farm, I like to stay at 1 gallon, maybe 2 gallons at the most. Dilute that down with some water. Put some micronutrients in there, a little bit of NP and K.
But that's in furrow.
Be okay.
You know, if you can go just off to the side, maybe you're in a 2x2 or something like that, you can use a pretty good shot because you've got a nice buffer then of soil in between your fertility and your soybean seed. The other thing that we're seeing more farmers do across the country is using strip till on soybeans, because now you can put 5 or 6 inches in between the bean and where that fertility is at. You can drop that seed right above where you put fertility in the fall, which is a fantastic way to go too.
I always say to guys, if you treat your soybeans like you treat your corn, you'd probably have a lot greater yield. I know we've seen tremendous yield increases by having good fertility out there, and I believe that in many cases you will too.
Well, you're talking about comparing corn and soybeans. One of the biggest challenges in soybeans that isn't quite as much a challenge in corn is controlling our weed of the week. We'll show you how coming up next.
The Weed of the Week is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
You work to protect your farm's legacy and to keep it going. Introducing the Enlist Weed Control System, an advanced herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate for exceptional control of tough weeds. The next chapter begins.
Our weed of the week is Roundup resistant Palmer pigweed.
Well, Roundup resistant, it's also ALS resistant and probably resistant to a whole host of other chemistries. It seems like this is the toughest weed to control around the country. We hear more complaints about Palmer pigweed control, especially in soybeans, and especially since it became Roundup resistant.
Okay, so I still claim that water hemp and Palmer pigweed are basically the same weed.
They're very, very close relatives.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to tell the difference. They'll talk about this little hair on the end of the leaf and stuff like that. But you know what? I don't care if you have water hemp or Palmer pigweed. Both of them can put on over 1 million seeds per plant. Both of them can rob dramatic amounts of yield. Both of them are probably Roundup resistant and ALS resistant in your area, and both of them can be controlled with the same herbicides.
All right, now when we talk about corn, we can start out with a pre-emerge herbicide. I like Balance Flex. That gives nice residual. Any of the premixes that have Balance Flex work pretty well. Also, we've had decent luck with Triple Flex and Sure Start, although they are ALS products in there, like the Python component anyway. So it's not like it's great, but it's still much better than just your standard grass herbicide. But post-emerge, we got lots of options.
Well, don't forget about Verdict pre-emerge too.
That would be another good one. Post-emerge, I like Status, although it doesn't have great residual. If you have to spray a little later in the season, we can use Callisto, Laudis, Impact, and adding in atrazine with any of those post-emerge killers in corn works pretty well.
Well, I noticed how you took the easiest crop to control Palmer
Sure,
pigweed first. Let me take the next easiest one. Let's go to wheat. If you start with Sharpen, you follow up with Husky, Palmer pigweed gone.
Well, as long as you're using a high rate of Husky and you don't have heavy pressure, that works pretty well. But then let's talk about soybeans. What our recommendation is for soybeans is to use 3 different sites of action pre-emerge. And don't use any of those products you can use post. With the 3 sites of action we're talking about, one of the yellows, like Treflan, Sonlan, or Prowl. I like Metribuzin, and you can find that in a premix like Authority MTZ, or you can just buy straight Metribuzin. And then I also like one of the PPOs, like Valor or Authority.
Okay, so with Fierce, we don't want to put the yellow with that. What we want to do there, since it's a DNA and since it's a PPO, we want to throw the Metribuzin with Fierce. So not to confuse you or anything, but Fierce together with Metribuzin or Authority MTZ together with one of the yellows, Treflan, Sonlan, or Prowl. That's our 3 site of action program that we believe is the very best thing you can do pre-emerge in soybeans, because let's face it, post-emerge in soybeans, if Roundup doesn't work, we don't have any real good options for you. FlexStar's okay, Cobra is okay, but neither one of them is likely going to be perfect.
Well, and the other thing is you can add some more residual in with your post. So when you're spraying a post-emerge product, you could put Warrant in, you could put some Outlook or Dual in post-emerge and try and get some more residual control, but you aren't going to burn it down with those residual products. They don't have burn down, they just have soil residual.
Well, once again, our weed of the week is Palmer pigweed. It is incredibly difficult to control because it is a lot of times both Roundup and ALS resistant. You should have a pretty good plan, and Palmer pigweed shouldn't rob a big percentage of your yield on your farm.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week's weed, but Iron Talk is coming up next.
Iron Talk is brought to you by Case IH.
What are farmers doing to feed the planet? They're using Quadtrek technology, soil management, and planting systems from Case IH to foster a better growing environment that maximizes yield potential. Visit caseih.com to be ready.
If you're looking for ways to increase yield and profitability, chances are you're putting more than just pop-up fertilizer in your furrow. Mixing several things together is a risky proposition though, so we have a solution in today's Iron Talk. In my corn furrow this spring, I will have liquid fertilizer plus Capture LFR insecticide plus Headline fungicide plus a biological product that we've had good luck with. That's a lot of stuff. Now, while we do believe each one of those inputs will provide a positive return on investment for our farm, we are concerned, number one, if they will all mix together without causing problems, number two, if they will antagonize each other or decrease the effectiveness of one of the other ingredients, and number three, how we can accurately apply precise rates of each product. One solution many farmers are turning to across the country is really some older technology with a new purpose. Dosatrons are getting quite popular. They don't require fancy electronics or complicated wiring. Dosatrons simply work by putting a desired percentage of a product, such as Headline fungicide, into the flow of a product, in this case, starter fertilizer. So as 5 gallons of starter fertilizer flows through the lines, the Dosatron can add 6 ounces of Headline per acre accurately to the solution. For the tank, Dosatron, and connectors, we spent about $800. It's simple to use and an inexpensive addition to your planter setup. If you're adding quite a bit to your in-furrow program like we are, a Dosatron may be something you consider adding to your farm. That's all for today's Iron Talk, and now back to the show.
At Case IH, our equipment doesn't just meet the standards, it set them. With industry-leading SCR engine technology, Case IH gives you more power while still meeting tough emission standards. In fact, the Steiger 620 is the highest horsepower tractor to ever come off the assembly line. And all Case IH equipment is agronomically designed to help you maximize your yield potential and your profits. The world of farming is changing. Will you be ready? Learn more at caseih.com/efficientpower.
If a new machine storage building or shop has been on your mind, it's time to call Morton Buildings. Now through the end of February, take advantage of discount pricing during our Building Value Days sales event. For over 110 years, Morton has served the American farmer with quality buildings for a variety of uses that meet your needs and style. Give us a call or visit us online and join generations of customers who've discovered the quality and dependability of a Morton building.
For years, FarmLogic has been the easiest and most convenient way to keep up with your farming operations. Well, it just got better. Introducing FarmPad for your phone. You always have your phone with you, so entering records as they happen is as easy as a touch of a button. Chemical database, GPS, service records, and more. When you do it on the farm, save it on your phone and it's backed up forever. Call or visit farmlogic.com for a free trial and find out why FarmLogic is the best decision tool for the farm.
Looking to maximize yield? Quickroots is a microbial seed inoculant that allows the plant root to explore a greater volume of soil, the key to higher yields. Quickroots continues to generate yield response on corn, soybeans, wheat, and more. Quickroots is applied to the seeds so the live microorganisms go right to work, enhancing seedling vigor, increasing the uptake of certain nutrients, including NPK, and expanding root volume. Maximize yield on your farm this season. Call TJ Technologies or your local dealer and get your Quickroots today.
Closed captioning for Ag PhD is sponsored by Norwood Sales.
The all-new S-Cube commercial tender is the only tender on the market with poly tanks, giving you the capability to haul seed, fertilizer, water, or liquid fertilizer. Each cube can hold 300 units of seed, 2,000 gallons of liquid, or 300 cubic feet of fertilizer. Options include full functioning wireless remote, stainless steel conveyors, and self-contained hydraulics. Get yours today at Norwood Sales.
That's all the time we have for today's show, but be sure to join us again next time for another Iron Talk, Weed of the Week, Farm Basics, and a whole lot more. I'm Brian Hefty.
And I'm Darren Hefty. Thanks for watching Ag PhD.
What's so sweet about manure? Animals eating prairie grass and returning nutrients to the soil through manure is the way nature is intended to work. To learn more about manure and how farmers use it to raise crops, visit the Responsible Nutrient Management Foundation at rnmf.org.